I want to welcome everyone to today's discussion hosted by the Bloomberg Center for Cities at Harvard University and the EdRedesign Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. My name's Paul Revel. I'm a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the founding faculty director of the EdRedesign Lab. We're thrilled to be with you today on this really important topic. We're all concerned, I think, in this room about challenges addressing economic mobility and the idea of mayors and the role of mayors in leading cities and civic leadership in partnerships for children and youth is right in the sweet spot of what the Education Redesign Lab actually is all about in our work. And we have a lot of experience and take great pride in the role and leadership of mayors in this work. Today's session is actually part of a variety of different sessions that are happening all across campus. I had the privilege of being at the graduation of this cohort of mayors last night, and it was spectacular and really inspiring. So congratulations to our mayors in the room on that. A word about EdRedesign. We're founded on the premise that every child should have clear and accessible pathways to well-being, educational attainment, civic engagement, and upward mobility, regardless of race, place, or income. So that's the nature of our work. And our one of our basic premises in launching this work is that schools alone aren't enough to get that job done. It takes an entire community. It takes a village. And we have to look beyond simply academic achievement to what constitutes flourishing and prosperity. And that's why we believe a cross-sector approach is so important. Our work is anchored in a cross-sector approach that brings together the different elements of a community to complement the work that's going on in schools. But this is a tall order. It takes a village. That's an easy phrase to roll off the tongue, but the work of building collaboration, collaborative incentives and structures is really important and hard work to do, and we're learning more about it all the time at the EdRedesign Lab. We've had, since the onset of our enterprise at EdRedesign a dozen years ago, we've had mayors leading the work in many of the communities across the United States where we work in a regular way with children's cabinets and other forms of collaborative action. So we've had a lot of experience on this, and we're at the same time learning a great deal more about it, and particularly pleased with our partnership with the Bloomberg Center because it brings mayors right into the center of our activity and work. So you're going to hear some important examples from communities today who are engaged in this work. This as a whole is an emergent field, growing very forcefully and deliberately, moving from the fringe. We're at an education school, and this work used to be sort of on the edge of what we would talk about when we discussed education reform. Now this cradle to career, place-based collaborative action work has moved to the center, and we're very excited to have this panel today to talk about the work. We've seen amazing support for this work all across our university, the different schools and departments in the university. And we're especially appreciative of the leadership that the Graduate School of Education has shown for this work. And our dean, Noni Lasso, couldn't be with us today because of her travel schedule, but wanted to bring a message to you. So we're going to see that message briefly on video just now.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry I can't be at this special event in person because of travel, but I'm just delighted that all of you have made it here to think deeply about the evolving role of municipal government in expanding opportunities and improving outcomes for learners across the lifespan. I'd especially like to give a warm welcome to all the mayors who are here at Harvard this week as part of the capstone convening. Thanks also to Bloomberg Philanthropies for their continued investment in Harvard and for their partnership with our School of Education and the EdRedesign Lab. This conversation about how cities can support public education comes at an especially important moment. Education itself is facing unprecedented challenges and a changing landscape. From pandemic recovery to intense political polarization, to falling test scores and persistent achievement gaps, through to the onset of AI and intense contemplation about the future of K-12 and higher education. What will it look like? How do we enact transformative change for the new learner and the new world? These are questions being asked all over. Meanwhile, across the country and around the world, we are seeing cities play an expanding role in shaping learning environments. After all, we know that educational outcomes are deeply intertwined with factors far beyond the classroom. Their health, their housing, their sense of safety, the economic stability of their families, and their out-of-school programming time, to name a few. Mayors, of course, sit at the very center of this complexity. In my own 25 years of work with schools and communities to improve literacy rates, I have seen this work firsthand. Our mayors work every day to align systems, build partnerships, and create environments where children and youth can thrive. Beyond my own experience and over the last many years, I have also heard incredible stories of success from the EdRedesign Lab, and I see it as our responsibility as a school of education to convene leaders to both share best practices and learn from one another. Here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, our goals are to generate and broker knowledge and to lead learning and leadership through research and training engagements with schools, districts, cities, and states, but also through conversations like this one. I hope that being together will spark new ideas and collaborations among the students, faculty, and leaders in this room. So thank you for being here, and to our mayors for their leadership, service, and commitment to communities and families. Enjoy your time at the Ed School.
Well, we thank the Dean in absentia. We welcome our panel to the stage. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, who's our incredibly talented executive director of the Education Redesign Lab. He's a lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. With me, he's also a member, a faculty affiliate member of the Bloomberg Center for Cities, Rob Watson.
Thanks, Paul. Well, thanks everyone for being here. I know some of you just got out of class with me and Paul, so you're doing double duty today, but we really appreciate, we have an extraordinary event this afternoon with incredible mayors. So we're really looking forward to getting in the conversation. As Paul shared, I'm Rob Watson, the executive director of EdRedesign and lecturer here at the School of Education. And it's a tremendous honor to partner with our dear friends at the Bloomberg Center for Cities on this event, the role of mayors in advancing citywide partnerships for children and youth. We want to welcome our in-person audience, but also to our friends who are tuning in from around the world virtually. We're really excited to have you with us to tune in. So just I want to say a quick word about the objectives of this event. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the key data points that motivate us to act at both EdRedesign and the Bloomberg Center for Cities on questions of child and youth development. And then we're going to get into it with our esteemed panelists. So the goals for today's event are to highlight how mayors are advancing cross-sector whole child strategies focused on education, but on economic mobility itself. We're going to explore how cities are aligning education systems with health, housing, workforce, and broader community development ecosystems. We're going to surface lessons on building and sustaining citywide partnerships across different governance contexts here in the US, but also across the pond in the United Kingdom. And we're going to identify actionable insights for students, scholars, practitioners, and policymakers. So before we jump in with our panelists, I just want to say a few more quick data points about EdRedesign and what motivates us. So as you heard from Paul, we're really committed to the idea of how do we create comprehensive cradle-to-career pathways for young people and families so that every child succeeds no matter their background. And one of the big data points we often center in why we need a broader approach beyond just schooling is because we know that kids spend only 20% of their waking hours between kindergarten and 12th grade in the US. 80% of their time is spent outside in a community. And so if we're going to create equitable outcomes for all people, we have to grapple with that 80% to meet the needs of the whole child. We also know here in the US and around the world, there's a well-documented correlation, an ironclad correlation between socioeconomic status, said simply, the wealth of your household and your educational attainment. And in just about every country in the world, kids from low-income backgrounds don't fare as well as their peers from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And so we know that there's questions of intergenerational poverty that have been with us a long time, and we have to address these original sins if we want to really meet the goal of opportunity for all. We also know that outcomes are not just shaped by schools, but by the ecosystem around them. So our friends at the School of Public Health talk about the social determinants of health. Our friends at the School of Design talk about housing and urban planning and the built environment as a central consideration to improving outcomes. We know there are questions of social capital. Our colleagues at Opportunity Insights in the economics department have studied that the greatest predictor for a low-income kid to rise to the middle class in the U.S. is actually the extent to which they have friendships with peers in the middle class and upper middle class. And we know workforce matters and broader community support. So these are key questions that mayors and community leaders need to think about to improve outcomes for all. And we also know that intergenerational disparities play out at the hyper-local level, that the neighborhood that you grow up in has an outsized impact on who you get to be in life. It can shape your educational outcomes, your economic outcomes, your health outcomes. I often share that in my hometown of Poughkeepsie, New York, where I grew up in public housing, a low-income Black male in my neighborhood, my old neighborhood, earns $14,000 as an adult, has about a 50% likelihood of being incarcerated at some point in their life. In that same neighborhood, people of any background live to be 73 years old compared to nearby neighborhoods of 85 and 90 years old. So we know that place matters, and that to address these challenges, we're going to need to think strategically and collaboratively across sectors to get the job done. And that's what our mayors are here to school us on today. We know that mayors and regional leaders are uniquely positioned to align youth and family serving systems, even systems that they don't have full control over, but they can leverage their convening power, their leadership, the platform that they have to exemplify what it might look like for a city to come together for its kids. And so with that, we have leaders here from three very different contexts, each navigating distinct governance structures and challenges, but all working towards a common goal, building more coherent and equitable systems for children, youth, and families in their jurisdictions. And so I'm excited to welcome to the Harvard Graduate School of Education our esteemed panelists, Dan Ariola, Mayor of Tracy, California. Let's give it up. We have Regina Romero, the Mayor of Tucson, Arizona. And Claire Ward, Mayor of East Midlands in the United Kingdom. So the first thing I want to do with you all is help us understand the places you call home, the places that you're working hard with your constituents for, the work you're doing to advance the outcomes for children, youth, and families, and the strategies you're deploying. What do you think is most critical, and what are some of the big ideas you're trying to put forth? So we'll start with Mayor Ariola.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Ariola. I'm the mayor of the city of Tracy in California. To give you a little bit about the area, essentially, I am the first city outside of the Bay Area. I am geographically located right in the middle of the state. Because of the geography of the state, we are the city that is required to go into the Bay Area from Central California. We have access to the North Market, the South Market, the Bay Area Market, the Reno, Nevada, Vegas Market. So we have a center there, but because of that, there's a lot of logistics movement that come through my city. However, we are the second largest city in my county, the first of which is Stockton. And the Stockton metropolitan area is the largest metropolitan area in the United States without a public university. And one of the things that we are facing essentially is this brain drain. So we have young people who are getting into incredible universities and colleges, but who leave and don't come back. And that was something that I wanted to tackle. So I actually grew up in the city that I represent, but I grew up myself under circumstances of poverty. By the time I was 13, I was working as a janitor and house cleaner. I'm a first generation American. English is not my first language. I am the son of a Portuguese immigrant and the grandson of Mexican immigrants. And for me, I recognized that an education was the pathway for me to break these cycles of poverty on both sides of my family. But ultimately, in my city, there was no one who had ever been fighting for people like me. I am the youngest mayor in the history of my city, but this is my 10th year in elected office. I was first elected at the age of 26, and today I'm one of the youngest mayors in the United States. I also am the first Latino mayor in the history of my city, despite the fact that we are a Latino minority majority city. And I'm also the first openly LGBTQ elected, not only in my city, but in the California Central Valley. Thank you. Thank you. But the reason I got into this work and I'm so passionate about this work is because there was never someone fighting for people like me and my family. So I've made a commitment to myself and to my professional career that I wanted to advocate and fight for young people like me who deserved more. And so ultimately, my biggest priority as mayor has been investing in youth, in prioritizing our youth, in elevating our youth. Because I'm a young mayor, I have an ability to access young people in high schools and build their trust that I don't think we've been able to see before. So because of that, we've restructured our city priorities to really center on fighting for the economic development and upward mobility of young people as a priority for my city. So while this has not been done before, and we still are very much in the portfolio stages of how we do this work, in my city, mayor terms are only 2 years long. So I am in the second year of my first term. So I'm very blessed to be working with Bloomberg in doing this work, commencing this work, but there is still so much work to be done. But for me and my project with Bloomberg that I'm bringing to my city, it is a cradle to career pathway that essentially broken up into 3 phases. The first of which is phase 1 with 0 to 5, recognizing that when we invest in early education and young families, we prepare those young people to be literate, we prepare them to have higher graduation rates, and ultimately to be ready and prepared for career pathways. Next, in phase 2, it is the K to 12 area, which again, we don't always have the authority as mayors to do the work, but we can partner with our local school districts. As a former school board member, I think that I have access and have built the relationships to be particularly effective in that area. And what we are doing is engaging the young people themselves, bringing them to literally to the table with us as we discuss policy to see what their needs are, because so many times we try as the adults in the room or as the leaders in the room to tell young people what they need without ever asking them what they need. And that is something that I do not do. I am always bringing young people and asking what their needs are, addressing it and implementing it. In phase 3, it's where we actually have the pathways into the careers, and there's various pathways. As I said, we do have a really strong collegiate university pathway, but what we're also doing is trying to build a public pathway. So in my city, I have a mayor's summer internship. So high school students come work with the mayor and they get to work at City Hall. It is a paid summer internship, and we put them in every different department throughout the city, and they get to do real work in Parks and Rec, in the city attorney's office. They work on projects. And then while I don't guarantee them a job, I can guarantee them an interview with the city so that they have an opportunity to work with the city. And I'm looking at replicating that model for different county agencies and other public agencies. We also are working to replicate that model with the private sector, and something that we used to have that kind of died off that we're trying to return essentially is by working with private employers, working with our Chamber of Commerce to create these programs in which we do resume building, mentoring, mock interviews, and then hopefully provide an internship during high school. And again, trying to get them to have at least an interview with that local employer upon high school graduation. And finally, we are working with our local trade unions to have apprenticeship programs, because we recognize there's so many good union jobs that have such strong benefits and such good wages that you don't necessarily need a degree for, but giving them an access point to that while they're in high school. So in high school, we have our students ready for the collegiate system, a public job pathway, a private job pathway, and a union trade apprenticeship pathway.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor. It's incredible. Let's give it up. As someone deeply passionate about my hometown, you had me at hometown. And I know there's some people in this room who come to places like this and wonder, can you go back home? Well, this mayor is a living example. So definitely great. Thank you for getting us started there. Mayor Romero, we would love to hear you tell us about Tucson and the strategies you're deploying for young people and families.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Buenos dias. My name is Regina Romero. I am proud daughter of immigrants, and the first in my family to graduate from, actually, let's go back a little bit, the first in my family born in the United States. I'm the youngest of six, grew up in a farm working community of Somerton, Arizona, and was first in my family to be accepted at a university and the first one to graduate from a university. Not the last, but certainly the first. And I too, very similar story as Dan. My first language is Spanish, and grew up in poverty. We didn't know that, right? Because we really didn't know that. Our parents did everything they possibly could to offer a good quality of life, food, and a stable home environment. And moved to Tucson, Arizona when I was 17, turned 18 there. And my parents really taught me the importance of contributing to my community. And I remember very early age, my parents would say, like, you're the only US citizen, you're going to register to vote, you're going to participate in the political process, you're going to vote for the 8 of us. And one by one, my siblings and parents had their naturalization process because they wanted to participate civically and vote. And so I too saw the power of education and what it did in my economy and the economy of my siblings and parents, and them seeing, well, if this little one can graduate from college, we could do the same. And so it really moved, public education moved our family. I had amazing public educators, by the way. If it weren't for my counselors and teachers helping me through high school and teaching me, because my parents would say, yeah, we don't want you to work in the fields. I worked in the fields. My parents did. My siblings did, picking lettuce and cauliflower and broccoli. And we would migrate to California. Stockton is where we would go and pick, whatever fruits the season brought us. And my parents always told me, like, we want you to go to college. We want you to get an education. We do not want you to work in the fields all your life. And so many kids of immigrants, that many of our parents worked in the fields or cleaning houses, or we really had that motivation behind us, right? Where we would say it's either college or working in the fields forever. And so it was easy choice for me. So my counselors, teachers prepared me how to do my financial aid, apply for colleges and universities, and helped me through as a first generation college bound student to get accepted to ASU in Phoenix and the University of Arizona in Tucson. It was an easy choice for me. Yes, I am a Wildcat. I am an alumna. I'm proud to, but it was an easy choice for me to go to Tucson because my siblings were already there. And so I had a system there. Anyway, Tucson, Arizona has more than 4,600 years of continuous inhabitation. We are rich in history, culture, tradition. At one point, we were part of Spain, and then Mexico, and then the United States. But underneath all of it, we have 2 native nations that have been there since time immemorial, the Tohono and the Pasquayaqui people, who have lived in the Sonoran Desert for thousands of years. And it is their tradition that we serve on, right? And so that's the 4,600 years that we are rich in history. At one point, the Sonoran Desert covers both Sonora, Mexico, and Arizona. And it is such a beautifully diverse, biologically diverse location. Gorgeous. You are all invited to go to Tucson. Having that history and background of growing up poor and really trying to understand what is the data, how can we prove that neighborhoods that are in need, that have high poverty, low infrastructure investment, historically underinvested, many cities like Tucson, we live through redlining. We live through urban renewal and displacement of many families in Tucson from their original places, right? And they were pushed out because of redlining. They could not purchase homes in the in the middle class neighborhoods with much more opportunity. And as you heard Rob, everything he said, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Because the data proves that the historically underserved and underinvested neighborhoods, those children have much less opportunity. And if we know anything as educators, I'm not one, but I highly admire your work, is that it really is talent is universal. No matter your race, no matter your economic status, talent is universal. Opportunity is not. And so all of the work that we've been doing in the city, I served 12 years before I was mayor, a city council member, and we started, slowly in terms of investing in youth employment opportunities within the city of Tucson. It took me 6 years. You're going to learn, Dan. It takes a long time to move bureaucracies and cultures in, I'm pretty sure, educational institutions, but government for sure. And so it took me a long time to go back to the data and do data-informed decisions on how we offer services and investments in our community. And we started making sure that underinvested, low poverty or high poverty areas received the first opportunity to apply for these youth employment jobs. We have an after-school program that we partner with school districts. It's called KidCo, and usually schools let out at 3 p.m. Well, workers are not let out at 3 p.m. So we did an after-school program that is up to 6 o'clock at night, and it's a recreational program offered at school districts. That's where we partner. Cross collaboration is key for us. And we also created a prosperity initiative. When I became mayor, I really wanted to infuse the data-informed, evidence-based decision-making into our decisions, our budgeting, how we disperse or invest in our city, including, I ran as a climate mayor, and so including where we plant trees. So we compared the poverty map to where the high heat island is felt in our city. And we discovered what we kind of knew, which is that high poverty areas are the hottest because they have less parks, they have less trees, less beautification elements to them. And so even to where we plant trees, we have an equity map that we use. This infrastructure investment that cities can do, we're not in charge of school districts. There's a governing board, separate elections for that. But how we as mayors can provide investments in infrastructure where you grow up matters so much. In what you're surrounded. If you have parks, if you have sidewalks to go to school, if you have trees in your neighborhood, it matters. And the research shows that the infrastructure that kids are surrounded with matters to their mental health and their emotional health, and many times their actual physical health, because low-income communities and vulnerable communities are the first and worst hit by climate change. Because of asthma and all that. So most recently, when I became mayor, we created a prosperity initiative. Poverty in Tucson, Arizona is abnormally high compared to the state. We have 19%. It was 24% when I first started as council member. Now we've reduced it to 19%. Still not acceptable. Where poverty is felt the most is in children. They're up 24% of our children live in poverty in our community. And so the root causes of so much, including crime statistics, as you said, Rob, depend on your economic stability. And so we said we're going to tackle poverty, and we know it's a huge issue, and we need others. We need to cross-collaborate with this huge issue. But we tapped into the nonprofit community, into the educational community at the University of Arizona. We did a lot of the research that has been done here at Harvard. We used it to create an evidence-based, data-driven prosperity initiative. We are collaborating, as I said, with our nonprofit partners and business partners. They're the Coalition for Prosperity. The City of Tucson Mayor and Council passed the Prosperity Initiative. Pima County Board of Supervisors or county commissioners passed the Prosperity Initiative. And we have 13 policy goals, and it's two generation investments in health, in affordable housing and economic mobility, in job opportunities. And in those areas, that's where we're focusing. Even our budgeting, both Pima County and the City of Tucson are focusing how we invest based on prosperity initiative goals. And so that is a huge piece of the puzzle. We also created a program, violence intervention and interruption program office where we work with youth. We're going to have a violence interruption youth boot camp this summer for youth ages 12 to 22 to really intervene in how youth can really hold each other accountable against violence. And so that's going to be really fun. It's continued investment from cradle to career and being able to offer opportunities and focus our approach and our investment in areas of our city where we have seen historic underinvestment. And so the infrastructure, layering infrastructure from our water and wastewater lines to, our investing in streets, investing in sidewalks and safe routes to school, investing in tree planting through our Tucson Million Trees initiative, using our equity map, and working with the local school to make sure that they have preschool opportunities, after school opportunities, and youth employment opportunities in those areas. In some neighborhoods, we've invested $50 million because they hadn't seen investment in 60 years. Their water lines were old. They had no sidewalks, no good roads, no tree planting, no parks. And so we, as I say, like to layer our investments, including programming for children and youth, to elevate the quality of life and create economic opportunity for all.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor. That was just a master class. You talked to like 15 different issue areas, and thank you for that. It's really profound. Let's give it up. That's an incredible set of explained there. A few things stood out. In your own journey, well, both of your journeys, you talked about caring adults. And one of the big things we talk about here at EdRedesign, the School of Education, is what if every kid had a caring adult, a navigator who would support them in school and in life to connect the dots in those critical moments of your journey. And so often, that only exists for some kids? How do we do for all kids what those of privilege get to do as a birthright? So that's a really important idea. You talked about the built environment. One of my great friends, Michael Murphy, an architect from Harvard Graduate School of Design, says architecture is not neutral. It can either harm or it can heal. And so the quality of our built environment and what it does. You talk about climate, a really salient topic, and how to connect the dots there. So many pieces to this puzzle that build on the critical need of schools, but go beyond just schools. Mayor Ward, I would love to bring you in the mix. Tell us about East Midlands. Tell us about the work you're doing, the way you're thinking about youth opportunity, working across sectors.
Great. Well, I'm a little bit different from our two colleagues of mayors because I represent a region. So in the East Midlands, I represent 2.3 million people. I have two cities, Nottingham and Derby. Nottingham, of course, the home of Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest. An area that is in the middle of the country. So if you have been to London, you could get to us maybe in about a bottom of the region, about an hour and 40 minutes on a train, about 2.5 hours drive. And we're a real mixed region. I have, in terms of its history, it's a region where we have large parts of it which were home of the Industrial Revolution. We were the first factories globally. So we have a UNESCO World Heritage Site where those factories were built. We're the home of where coal mining, lots of my communities were built around the coal mines. None of those exist now. But we also powered our region, our country with our coal-fired power stations. None of those are in operation now. And so when you think about that industrial heartland within England, we've gone through a huge amount of change, and it's left its mark in terms of the cost of jobs, that deindustrialization. And so for us, moving into that new opportunity to provide jobs means that we have to think differently about the skills and about our young people. And one of the things that brought me into becoming mayor, and I'm the very first mayor of the East Midlands. So unlike what you have here in the States, where you have a very long tradition of mayors of cities, we are still rolling out this devolution model into England. We only have 14 mayors in England. The longest one that's been around is in London, where the London mayor, the city mayor, has been there for about 26 years. And then those of us who are coming on and representing our regions in new ways. Some of us were elected. I was elected for the first time in 2024 and have had to build the organisation and the capacity. I walked through the door after being elected. I had about 20 interim seconded staff part-time. In less than 2 years, I now have about 350 staff. We are getting out the door £500 million. I'm responsible for adult skills, 19 plus. I'm responsible for public transport now. I'm having to build a new regional transport system, bringing together what was already there, but in responsibilities from the 4 councils that sit within my region. I'm responsible for economic growth, which of course is at the heart of everything that we do. But for me, economic growth in itself is not enough. It has to be inclusive growth. It has to reach into all of those areas, whether it's in my 2 cities, where we have significant amount of deprivation, where 1 in 3 children in parts of that are living in poverty, where we have 30% economic inactivity levels of parts of our region. And yet we also have some of the wealthiest parts of the UK in my region too. So those differences mean that we have to have an approach that recognises the assets, the opportunities, the great companies. We're the home of Rolls-Royce in Derby. We're the home of Toyota for the UK. Manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. We make trains in my region. So we are the home of pharmaceuticals with Boots Pharmacies, where ibuprofen was invented. So lots of history, but it brings lots of challenges because not all of my communities live in the city. And poverty, as we know, it has the same traits wherever you are, whether you are in Tucson, or in Tracy, or you're in Nottingham, but also if you're in my rural communities. But the opportunities are completely different. So if you live in the communities, if you live in the city and you are in poverty, you may live cheek by jowl with some of the greatest opportunities that sit around you. But can you access them is part of that key. But if you live in my rural areas, in my small towns, in my ex-coal mining communities, you don't have a transport system that gets you to those opportunities, to those skills, to those jobs. You cannot see any of those things around you. You know, for some of the kids who live near me, their greatest excitement is to go to the big market in the next town, which is like 4 miles away. That they don't even realize at times the potential, let alone the opportunities that are there. So one of the things, again, very similar, is we identified, and I didn't grow up in my region, but I brought my family up there. I moved there when my kids were young, and I brought my kids up there. And one thing that I began to notice as they became teenagers was that lack of opportunity for them and for their friends. And the fact that as young people, when they had something to offer, they didn't think that the region could give them those opportunities. And so they'd leave, they'd go to university, they'd go to London, or they might go to Manchester, and they wouldn't come back. And that, for me, is the way in which you see a slow, or rather too rapid, decline of your region. And everything that we had to offer was not going to be realized if we continued without. So obviously, I'm new. I'm in less than 2 years. I've been building the aeroplane whilst I'm trying to fly it at top speed. And therefore, some of the programs that we're bringing to this are in the early infancy. But I have a youth ambition. I want my young people in this region to know that when they grow up in the East Midlands, they have the best place to live in, to work in, and to learn in. And you'll see that phrase across everything that I say and all of my materials and everything on our ambition in our authority. Because if we get that bit right, then everything else will fall into place. That growth will be there, that economic opportunity and access, that transport system that becomes the enabler for kids getting from the rural parts into the cities, all to those jobs, to those skills. It will allow us to build the houses that we need so that the young people can actually afford to live in the region that they were born in and brought up in and want to be part of their family. So what I brought to the Bloomberg program was the idea that we needed to have a youth ambition that would support young people to access careers and opportunities as we were building the skills opportunities from 19 plus. And it's too late to wait for them when they become 19. And we know that we already have a bigger problem than many other parts of the UK. So we use data called the NEET figures, NEET. They are not in employment, education, or training. And we have a higher proportion. I have nearly 15% of my young people are NEETs. It's greater than the national average. And so we are currently running a youth guarantee trailblazer for the government, a pilot project over the next couple of years to identify those young people who are NEETs and the barriers to getting them back into education, employment, or training. Some of that is health, maybe mental health, maybe physical health. And so we can work with our national health system. We can work with other partners to support them to get them into those opportunities. They may need individual support. They may need simply to understand the opportunities that are already out there that they don't know about. They may need support on transport to get to some of these places. But we also recognized, with the help of Bloomberg and Harvard, that what we really needed to do was to understand our own data better. And because we're a new organization in our region, lots of parts and partners in the region were holding data that we didn't have. and they were holding it in different formats. So we weren't even talking the same language. And so what they've helped us to do is to take a step back and to build a data program that allows us to bring together the data that exists so that we will be able to track with schools, and I don't have responsibility for education, but it comes back to this convening power of mayors, so that we will be able to track those young people and see the data as they go through schools and colleges, that we can then start to engage with those young people and with their parents and with their educators, so that we can identify those young people in advance who are most likely to become NEET. And we already know that. And yet when, as a system, we're not doing enough about it. If you look at a child who's 11, who doesn't regularly attend all their classes, who is on free school meals, who live in certain postcodes, we will already know their propensity to become a NEET. So why aren't we doing something about it? So I have challenged my organization to not simply work on a program that empties the hopper, as I say, okay? We've got all of these young people constantly falling into a hopper of being NEETs. But unless we go back up the escalator or the pipeline, we will not be able to stop more of them from going along and falling into that hopper. And one piece of national data that's really stuck in my mind over the last few months is we know that if you, as a young person, through your education, have 4 or more interactions with employers or work, you are 86% less likely to become a NEET. Now, those 4 interactions could be an employer comes into your school and talks about the world of work and jobs and what it means. It might be that you attend a career fair at some point. It might be that you get work experience. And so I want to increase the opportunities of our young people having those chances by using my convening powers to bring our employers who need to build that next generation, their pipeline of young people who are going to come and work for them. I want to work with the schools and the colleges so that they can help their young people and their children to be on that pipeline for great skills and for great jobs in the future. And to be able to inspire them that this is a region that's going to be with them right from the very start. So we're not calling it cradle to career, but I think what you already begin to see by mayors coming together is that we all have the same challenges. We have different systems, we have different governance, but we're doing things that address those same problems. Because poverty, because lack of opportunity, because all of those structural things, wherever you are in the world, they are very, very similar traits. And the solutions are very, very similar too. Investment, opportunity, unlocking it, helping people realize what their potential is in the first place. And far too many of the kids in my communities don't even know what's out there. They don't know the jobs that could give them those chances. And part of my job is to help unlock all of that.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll just give it up. So you all did a few things. One is you maybe want to go visit all of your cities. So I think I'm gonna have to get that on the bucket list. But you also, Mayor, when you spoke a lot about the assets of a place, but also the real challenges and how you're thinking about leveraging much of the abundance in your region, the opportunities, but connecting it to those who need it most. Paul Revel, our founder and faculty director, says often that one of the big challenges for young people is that too often they go through systems anonymous. And that anonymity is one of the biggest threats to opportunity. We need every young person to be seen, known, and heard, and to have these touches that you just described so that they can find a path to social and economic mobility. I do want to, all of you did a fantastic job weaving both the opportunities and the challenges of your localities. You spoke about places where disadvantage lives most. You spoke about populations that have historically been underinvested, or neighborhoods or parts of your community. And so all of you are working in really intriguing ways across systems. I'd love for each of you to say a word about both give us some examples of how you're getting different systems to work together, perhaps systems that haven't historically done so, but also not just at the, as we would say here, grass tops level or at the like systems or CEO or the chief level, but with residents, with folks who are experiencing things themselves. One of our fellows at EdRedesign, Adeline Cohen, says that lived experience is data that hasn't been coded yet, and that data point is just as important as some sort of trend on education or economics. How do you think about aligning systems, but also centering residents in your cross-sector work? So we'll start with you, Mayor Ward, and we'll go that way to Mayor Wilbur.
So residents at every age, it's really important to get their views. So I've established a youth committee, and we meet with the youth committee, we ask their views, we've engaged them in the data track process through this Bloomberg Harvard program, so that they can help us to understand their experiences and their lived experiences, because they are going to be different where they live, depending on whether they're in a city or in the small towns and communities, and their own backgrounds and opportunities. And we've tried to get a good mix of people with different experiences to be part of that. But there's also other things that we are doing to engage with our broader community. So I have in the last few months, launched a community development fund. And I picked 10 areas, rather than having people competing against each other. I chose the 10 communities that would receive around about, I'm just to convert it into dollars here, around about $400,000. Now that probably doesn't sound very much until you recognize that the communities are in some cases 2,000 residents to 22,000 residents. So in those 10 communities, that's a sort of range between one end and the other. And I then asked them to come forward with proposals from those communities about what their challenges were and how they could improve their own areas and opportunities, because they were picked because they had high levels of deprivation, low levels of kind of social community engagement or support, maybe high levels of health needs as well. And what I found out of the 10 areas that we're now supporting with this funding over the next couple of years is that many of the programs are focused on young people in those communities, with sport, with educational opportunities, with community opportunities. One of them is actually backing a Scouts program, because it will reach into some of the most deprived parts of the cities to have a place where young people can be and support. We've got support for a youth centre in one of the programs. So I think for me, it's not just about what we do on the formal levels of engagement at youth committee, working with our partners to understand the data about where young people are and whether their needs and that individual engagement. It's also using money and of investment in other programs to reach out into communities specifically to support young people and understand from that data, which we will do over the next couple of years, what works, what doesn't work, how you engage, what the feedback is. But my initial sense is that when you give money to people and you ask them to use that money in the investment of their own communities, this isn't about them letting me down. It's about them not letting themselves down. And when you empower people, they will do the best for their own communities and they will do the best for their future generations, for their children. And I think it's that empowerment that I hope will help us to make some significant changes in the way in which we engage young people, by asking them and by empowering them to be part of the change that they want to see and to be in our region.
Thank you.
I think there's a variety of both formal and informal. There's a variety of both formal and informal pathways this can be done in, and perhaps the informal ones are some of the most effective and the most important. When it comes to like the formalized relationships, ultimately as a city, oftentimes we don't have the authority. Specifically with schools, most mayors don't have control or authority over school districts. I think I'm uniquely positioned as a former school board member who knows everyone, because I used to be my former employees, to have access to know who sits in which positions, which directors, and having that relationship to be able to engage them in a way that others have not. Um, and also recognizing that for early childhood interventions, things like access to nutrition assistance, food stamps, child care benefits, a Medi-Cal, those things are not provided by cities. It's different by various states and countries, but at least in California, those are services provided by counties. And so it is incredibly challenging to access those because then every step of the way of separation is additional barriers. For ours, it's also transit. So when our county chair is Stockton, which is almost 30 miles away, and we don't have a transit opportunity, how was a single mom, a working family, going to get all the way to Stockton to get nutrition assistance for their families? So those things are very challenging, and we're working on developing ideas on how to remove those barriers in formalized ways to see how we can enhance that access. For us, some of the things that we're starting, this has not been done before, but some of the strategies we're pursuing including providing space for our human health service agencies within city hall, within municipal properties, because I can provide space, I can provide time. And then so we would have county employees who could come into our spaces to provide those services to our constituents, and then communicate them as office hours or something similar, so that our residents have better access in our own communities. There's also opportunities for paper applications. We want to recognize that there are barriers for folks living in poverty who may not have the ability to go onto computers or to print. Also, millennials don't have printers. So just having those opportunities where actual brochures, paperwork, applications are available in the spaces that we can provide to lower some of those barriers. Working with our hospitals who, when we have newborns, provide kind of care packages. We're looking at different ideas of how we can create essentially like city magazines of resources. It's something that we do with regards to recycling and waste. Every year, we send every person along with their utility bill information and resources and how they can recycle items and all the programming options we have for e-waste disposal and those types of things. Everyone gets it in an actually very high quality magazine. Every quarter, we do something for the entertainment in town. We have plays, we have movies, all the entertainment opportunities that's provided by the city. Every quarter, each household gets this magazine. So we're now working on how can we work with our hospitals to create a magazine of these resources from the county to the locality in one stop, because new families don't know what they don't know. So we can provide them the education when they need to be focusing on their newborns. So those are some of the strategies that we're working on formally. And of course, we can have MOUs with these different agencies to effectuate that in our city, in our community, in our neighborhoods. But the informal ways is how we've been getting a lot of the buy-in, because again, if we are not engaging with young people will not access them. We have to provide not only the opportunity, but the belief that it'll work for them. And so oftentimes that is what I go into. I go into every single high school. I talk to their leadership groups. I talk to their minority school club groups. I host a mayor's town hall. And the first time I did this, it was kind of a gag, because I held the city's first student town hall, and I invited every elected official because everyone was excited. Like, we're going to get young people in a room. So we filled one of our high school stadiums full of adults and young people, and I had them just like this in chairs. And the elected officials always thought that they were going to get say a speech or something. But the kicker was, and they didn't know it until I got there, I said, "Welcome everyone, and thank you to all of our leaders, but you will not be speaking tonight. Tonight, you will hear only from young people." And that is something now that I do every year at a mayor's youth town hall. And I hold those spaces. And so those are some of the informal ways that I'm getting ways to activate young people, get them excited, get them involved. And again, like I said before, when we have policy decisions, I sit down with young people and talk about it. We did that very effectively when I passed a social equity initiative in light of what was happening with BLM. We sat with young people to work on policy initiatives for equity in our city. And we're looking at replicating that model in all policy areas.
So after Mayor Romero responds, we're going to do a quick round of questions before we close out for the audience. Somebody.
So I hope you're enjoying hearing my fellow mayor speak, because every time a fellow mayor speaks, I get new ideas. I love the magazine idea. I really appreciate hearing our fellow mayors. That's why I think that Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative is so special, because this is what we do, right? We learn from the research that's being done at Harvard, and then we put it into action through mayors, and every single mayor have initiatives that I'm like, oh my God, why haven't I done this? So it's amazing to hear my fellow mayors. You talked a little bit, Rob, about how are we putting people with lived experience and residents' voices into our policy making. I'm a policy wonk. I love, love, love policy and data informed decision making. And it kind of became one as the mayor. So you all, when you have 7 years in, you'll be like, oh my God, yes. But for me, I love piloting programs. I love innovating, and I love to, if something doesn't work and it's not going to work, pivoting from that to something different. And usually I like to hear the voices of the community and their needs. I started as my professional career while I was going to the University of Arizona. I had to work. And I worked for 5 years with the county government in putting youth to work. I was a youth employment program coordinator for 5 years. And then another 5 years after I graduated from the U of A, I worked in neighborhood reinvestment programming. We would put infrastructure funds into the highest poverty areas of our city. And so I learned to work with neighborhoods, and really kind of take from their needs and their voices and put them into policy frameworks that were resident informed. And I still do that to this day, with being a council member for 12 years and now mayor for 7. And one of the first programs that I started piloting was brought to me by our police department. And our police department, they called it Place Network Investigation. Tucson became the first of 4 cities around the country where we piloted this program, and we targeted micro areas with high crime and gun violence. We basically took it out of the hands of the police department, brought in the neighbors. They were a part of it, but our parks department, businesses, neighbors in the area, our code enforcement, parks and rec, all these departments that offered sit-down conversations, and the neighbors told us what they needed. We saw gun violence reduction. We chose 3 areas. Now we've expanded to 5. 85% gun violence reduction in those areas, based on what residents wanted to see happen. So Viva, that's our Viva sites now, our violence interruption vitalization action program. We moved it from a pilot program to a permanent program in our city because we're seeing amazing, and that was all based on resident input in terms of what they needed, and we included youth in that.
Thank you for that, Mayor. Wow, that's incredible. So we're coming up on time, so I'm going to bundle several questions at once, so our mayors can respond, and then we'll close out. So who wants to get in the mix? And we ask that your question ends with a question mark. So we will go here, and then we'll go here, and then we'll go there. Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so very much for generously sharing your time and your brilliance. My name is Johnny Reed. In the real world, I'm a mental health professional, but here I'm a doctoral student in Harvard's Education Leadership Program. And so my question is at the center of economic mobility and mental health. And so as we consider the type of young people who we want to be leading our communities, we consider their ability to stress manage, make strategic decisions, and also build leadership or relationships across lines of difference. So I write policy that makes learning about mental health education mandatory with superintendents and through kindergarten to grade 12. And so I'm curious to know your perspective on how mandatory mental health education for students in grades kindergarten to grade 12 could actually prepare them to be the leaders of tomorrow that we need.
Thanks for that. And we'll go here to you. Yep. You should use the table mic right there.
Hi, my name is Sifat. I am a graduate of this education school. Thank you for sharing all of your wonderful work that you have been carrying in your own areas and representing the people. You are doing a wonderful job. I'm really inspired. Someday I want to be in politics. So I would love to hear about what kind of challenges have you faced to bring the voices to policy making. In my experience working with communities, I have seen there are people who are interested in policy and they are very willing to give you insights. But there are people who are really hard to bring on those boards. They don't get to attend the meetings, they don't get to attend the town halls because they have a job, they have multiple jobs, they can show up. So what challenges have you faced in bringing those voices into your policy designs, and what have you done to bring those voices in? Thanks.
And then we'll go here to you. Was it you right there? Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. My name is Michelle. I come from the Kennedy School. I'm a public policy student. My question, I just attended a discussion with Dr. Peter Blair not too long ago. He's a professor here at the education school. One thing he talks about is folks that are educated through alternative routes. So I think a lot of you mentioned creating opportunities for folks that don't go to the college and don't go through that route. So my question is, how do you work with employers to create those opportunities for young people in a time where more and more employers are requiring a bachelor's degree as part of job requirements? Thank you.
Thanks for that. So the three questions had to do with mental health, making it a mandate as a part of policy making and supporting young people. The question of hard to reach voices and how to include them in the policy making process, and the question of alternative routes and how to reset the table so that people of different backgrounds can have access to high paying jobs and particularly alternative pathways to post-secondary enrollment and completion. I would love for you all to respond to what you'd like, and then, but please keep it brief so we can give you a chance to do a last word before we close out. Mary, yes?
I love all the questions, but I feel compelled to answer the question about engaging communities. I did a lot of work, legwork when I was working with neighborhoods. I worked for 5 years with neighborhoods, hard to reach, low income areas that had a lot of need. And that's where I kind of was doing a bit of a organizing job with those neighborhoods because as well, right? Many working families don't have the time to even go to neighborhood association meetings because they have to come home and make dinner and, they don't have the time. So we found the locations where in school districts, right, where the family either self-sufficiency programs or family support programs were, and we would go to them. So we adjust our time in the city of Tucson throughout all of those years that I've learned the hard to reach voices. We really go mobile. So we go to the schools especially where the family self-sufficiency or family support programs are, reach out to them, make sure that we show up at events that are well attended from the community. That's where we do tons of surveys and and input opportunities for our neighbors. We go to the neighborhood association meetings. We have a tradition that we've created at the city of Tucson where we have to have translation services. The second language most spoken in Tucson is Spanish, so we have to have translation services into Espanol. We provide food in the evening. We have child care support, and we choose a location that has a transit line attached to it. And then we also, in the time of COVID, we went all virtual. And so we have in-person opportunities at different times of the day, noon, evening, virtual opportunities in the mid-morning, evening. So we try everything we possibly can to make sure that we're including voices in the youth space. We have a commission, a Metropolitan Education Commission, that is supported both by the city of Tucson and our county, and we have a youth advisory council. And so we have a town hall as well that the mayor and other electeds attend to, but we do it in tables, right? We move around in tables and have conversations with youth. We have like 50 tables that we have. So it's an all-day thing. But we've been able to adjust how we bring the voices of the community to the table. We do a lot of door-to-door work as well. We canvass neighborhoods when we're not hearing from that particular neighborhood on a project that's there. We go door-to-door and knock on their door and say, we want your input.
To the question related to mental health, I think one, I would absolutely be in support of that. I think it's mental health needs are so prevalent these days, and we have better understanding, and we need to implement that understanding into policy. Some of the work that I've done related to that is when I held my very first town hall, the topic was supposed to be student safety, and what we recognized was that students' version of safety was very different than what the adults thought safety was. The adults thought it meant physical locked doors, those type of mechanics, whereas students really were talking about mental health needs. So as a school board member, I championed efforts to move funding from the safety funds towards mental health service and access, because that was what made students feel safer. And as a council member and mayor, we have community funds that get distributed federal, state, county, down to localities. I've made it a priority that we invest in particular nonprofits that do socio-emotional supports for at-risk youth in our community. So that's how I'm prioritizing that. With regards to access to our communities, one, I do many of the same things that Regina does. But I think it's also important that we find the leaders and utilize their networks. So while I may be the first Latino mayor, I've tried to start efforts to have translation services that we've never had before. But I recognize that there are Latino nonprofit organizations who already have the networks. So bringing them in and making sure that they stay engaged, know what's going on. We have mailing lists that they can join when topics come up, so we can make sure that we are accessing them and their networks. Very similarly, we do not have a lot of resources for the queer community in the entire Central Valley, which is a much more conservative part of California. So we do access at different pride festivals where we're engaging people to provide services and work with the nonprofits on the ground who are doing the work. With regards to other communities, we have a huge commuter population because of the geography of our city. So we recognize that the commuters can't make it to the normal 9 to 5 work hours. So we've done digital access as well as doing things in the later evenings so the commuters can get to it, as well as on the weekends, including opening up opportunities during our morning fruit and vegetable marketplaces that we do. And with regards to the question about employers, I think what we have done is we recognize there's a disconnect between the students' wants and needs for their careers versus the anticipated believed needs by employers. So we've held separate workshops, and then we've switched the data that we received from the young people and from employers and asked them to reflect upon that. And what we're now doing is trying to bring in academic partners. We do have a community college, and we're working on hopefully getting a satellite campus for a public university, a partnership with Stanislaus State. That would be the first time that we'd be able to get a bachelor's degree in my county, in my city. And so we're working on those preliminary stages, but having academics be the center communicators between employees and employers and young people to facilitate that.
As I explained a little bit earlier, as a region, we're slightly different in that some of those powers sit with the councils or they sit with the national government, particularly in relation to schools and education. But my role is really to utilize the assets and the partnerships and the organizations and the convening power to try and bring some of that together, particularly to focus on the opportunities that young people have who don't want to go to university for a whole range of different reasons. And in the UK, we are really focused now on those skills opportunities, because if we want to grow our local economy, particularly the areas that I want to grow within my region, such as green energy skills, we're going to be the home of fusion energy development. It will be a global opportunity as well as the UK's investment into fusion energy development. But I need young people who not only will be part of the construction industry to build it and to build all the homes that we need and to build the infrastructure, but I also want them to go in at different levels so that they can not just be jobs for people with degrees and masters and PhDs, but at every single level. And I also need them in many of the other areas where we're growing, whether it might be in advanced manufacturing. When we think about Rolls-Royce, for example, as the home of not just manufacturing the engines, but also nuclear. And it will be the development of small modular reactors. So we will see a lot of that work that is going to need investment into young people's skills. So I'm working with the universities, with our colleges, to make sure that there are skills opportunities there in all of these trades and that they're good quality jobs that will help us to deliver in other aspects of our economic growth. And one of the things that I want to do is to ensure that, as going back to what I talked about earlier, to make sure that throughout their career and throughout their journey in schools or colleges, they do get access to some of that work experience to try and tackle the challenges of young people. You know, a kid growing up in some of the poorest parts of a single parent who doesn't work has no access into networks that give those kids work experience. And so they may never know what it looks like. And that puts them at a disadvantage. So I want to create a work experience platform that brings together all of my employers in my region and my colleges and my kids, so that whoever you are, it doesn't matter whether your mum or your dad or some other neighbor can get you in to somewhere. You have the same chance of accessing those career opportunities. And I think if we can do that, we can then ensure that young people get the starting point that may mean that they come back to doing degrees or they do degree apprenticeships. But having those apprenticeships, having those early year careers are so important. And we do that, we create, I think, the solutions to the other two questions, which is the inclusivity, because this is all about inclusive growth for me. It's not about the bottom line, it's about who we are able to reach into. And when you do that, you create the opportunities for the resilience, for the confidence, and for the support that is needed through young people's life to give them those brilliant skills, the best jobs, and a good quality of life. And that's what I want for my young people.
Thanks so much, Mayor. So we are at time, and I think that's the perfect place to end. We hope we've convinced you that this work is cross-sector, that mayors and cities and regions are uniquely positioned to advance opportunities, and we hope many of you in this room will work with your city governments and regional governments back home to improve outcomes for kids. So let's give it up again for our mayors. Thanks to the Bloomberg Center and the EdRedesign team. We'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.